Well, happy Wine Wednesday, Canadian wine lovers. So good to see y'all. And thank you for stopping by to talk about Closson Chase and Prince Edward County. Now, we do have an amazing interview between Keith Tyers and Carl Boucher. Keith is the winemaker at Closson Chase Vineyards, the winery that we are featuring and discovering as a club this week, a winery that has wowed us. I think the only other winery that's gotten this many high scores from Carl is Batchelder. And there's a 95 plus point Pinot Noir in this one. There's a 94 plus point Chardonnay. There's a great, this one here is a different one. It's a great Chardonnay as well. So we have had so much fun discovering this winery, and it has a lot of history mixed in with the fact that Prince Edward County is like the newest, most up and coming, fastest growing wine region in Canada. And they bury their vines in winter. So it is super, what's the word, challenging? But as we all know, sometimes the most challenging spots to grow grapes make for the best wines. So without further ado, let's hear what these guys have to say about Prince Edward County, winemaking there, and Closson Chase. Cheers. Oh, and I have to say, I would love to know what's in your glass if you're tuning in. And in my glass tonight is this lovely sparkling white from Mayhem. I have never tried their sparkling wines. I've only tried their regular wines, and I love them. I think they pack great value, and they make some great whites. And the Merlot, the Anarchist Merlot, one of my favorites, really good. So I don't often drink cans, but I thought this is perfect because Carl is traveling right now. It's just me, and I love some sparkling. So cheers, guys. Happy Wine Wednesday, and we'll see you real soon.
Here you go, Canadian wine lovers. I am with one of my favorite person in the whole Ontario wine industry, one of the winery that I love so much and was so excited to be with this week. This is Keith. Keith is winemaker here at Closson Chase in Prince Edward County. Keith, thank you so much for taking time to join me and to chat Prince Edward County wine with me today.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Carl. It's a pleasure.
It's such a pleasure. You know, I feel like half an hour or 20 minutes, half an hour is not going to be nearly enough to have everything I want to talk with you. Because, you know, Prince Edward County is such a special place. It's such a unique growing region that's like, I feel like we can talk about it all day long, but how about we start by the story of Closson Chase? Because how the project has started and when did it started?
So I only got 20 minutes, you said, but I got to make this.
I know it's going to be a challenge.
Because anybody who's watching this who's ever heard me, I can go off on a diatribe for 20 minutes and not say anything related to that. So anyway, Closson Chase exists. It was formulated back. It started about 1995, 96. When one of the first wine growers here, a gentleman named Jeff Heinrichs, approached Deborah Pascus, who was my predecessor and the first winemaker here at Closson Chase, to get some Pinot Meunier cuttings, because he was thinking that Prince Edward County's claim to fame would be sparkling wine. So making very much traditional style, traditional method sparklers. So Deborah was working at 30 Bench, and they had some of the only plantings at that time of exceptionally old Pinot Meunier, because everybody, the four guys that founded 30 Bench had put them in, realizing that Ontario could potentially make some decent sparkling wine based on the climate we were in. So Jeff went there to get these cuttings to graft them himself. He showed up at the winemaker's house, or the house at 30 Bench, which I know it still exists there today. I think it's now a guest house. But he showed up there and he said, knocked on the door, and Deborah came to the door and said, "Who are you?" He said, "Well, I'm Jeff Heinrichs. I called you, and I'm here to pick up my Pinot Meunier cuttings." And it's in December because it's dormant, right? And she's these things. So they says, "Yeah, right this way." They go, they get the cuttings, they come back. And she said, "Just out of curiosity, where do you think you plant these grapevines?" And he says, "Prince Edward County." And Deborah laughed. She said, "You know the county?" And she said, "Of course I know the county. I've been there several times for vacations. And how the hell are you going to grow grapes there?" And Jeff said, "Well, you know, here's what I know, and here's what I've studied, and this is all this stuff." And You know, they made great wine there, and they made world award-winning wine, and the climate and all the history of agriculture and farming. And they grow amazing apples, right? And they have cherry trees, and they have peach trees and nectarine trees, and um, pear trees, right? We have plum trees. We have a lot of fruit trees that grow wildly in our hedgerows. So if you have apple trees, you can ripen a grape. They relatively have the same period of time. So, and if you have a fruit tree, then you have a soil that's permeable with a taproot, which means that a grapevine can grow here as well. You can mitigate the climate is Prince Edward County. And so,
And it's just like the Okanagan. I don't want to cut you off, Keith, but it's just like the Okanagan, right? Like prior to be a wine region, it's all about orchard. It's about peach trees, pear trees, and apple trees. So yeah, that's the soil, and the temperature is well suited for the vines as well.
exactly. And so that's how it all started. And then Deborah being who Deborah was and making the Tempe Pasco Chardonnay, the ownership group was one of the Sonia Smith was acquaintances and friends with Deborah, and they buying for wine, and Seton was also part of that. And so the whole plan, you know, Deborah literally said, "Hey, what do you think about growing grapes and opening a winery?" And they said, "Ah, sounds interesting. That'd be fun, right?" And so what initially started out as a I don't want to say a fun project, but it was a fun project.
Or a head scratching project.
Has now become what this beast is today. You know, from the 4 acres when I started back in 2003 to 35 acres of estate grown fruit with another 5 acres farm, plus the grower that I work with in Niagara. You know, when our initial vintage in 2007 was 700 cases, we now make roughly 7,000 cases. So it's been a journey over the last 25 years, because this is our 25th anniversary year this year.
25th, eh?
Yeah, and so we've been there, and we've done it all. We've seen it all. We've made mistakes 3-4 times, but that's what you do when you're pioneers in a brand new wine region. Um, Here we are today, right? And as you're drinking Pinot in your glass, I mean, everybody says when you talk about the viticulture and what it takes to grow grapes here in Prince Edward County, everybody says, "Why the hell do you do it?" And you put a glass in front of them and you say, "Because it tastes like this," and it tells you a story like no other place in the world. Pinot Noir, but it's Pinot Noir from here. It's not from Niagara. It's not from Burgundy. It's not from California. It's not from Italy. It's not from
It's
Turkey.
back.
Here. Whether our soil structure or climate are similar to other places in the world, what happens here is different than it happens anywhere else. And even in the little microcosms of the 3 vineyards we farm on the estate, the temperature's different. The soil structure, although has similar composition, is different. Aspect is different, and therefore the grapes change and develop accordingly to their place. And Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, even even though they're grown in a lot of other places in the world, when grown to a high standard and low yield, they tell you a story from where they come, and that's why we do it.
It's incredible. You just mentioned something about like it, because I think that's where we're at in the progression of the Canadian wine or history or the progression where we're at. I think, Mira, it's time. We always tend, and I think we're all guilty of that. Oh, it's Burgundy style. It's a little bit more Sonoma style. It's a little bit more Argentinian style. Like, we always refer to these landmarks, to these traditional regions. I really think that we're getting really close and very ready to start referring to our own landmark, to our own very region, right? How different Chardonnays from BC are from Prince Edward County than they are from Niagara. How different Niagara on the Lake is from Niagara Escarpment. So
Absolutely.
I think that we are ready now. And there's been a tremendous work in Ontario by defining in Niagara by defining the subregion, and BC had a lot to learn how to separate and define their subregion. And Niagara does a tremendous, and I think that's where it's going now. And we're starting to feel like the definition of our own terroir is just so important to build our own personality, right?
You're absolutely correct. And it's not just us on this side of the business. It's wine lovers like yourself who are getting out there and saying, "Hey, like, not come and look, come and see what we're doing. We're making world-class wine in our own backyard that you pay Canadian dollars for, and they don't jump because, you know, freight's gone up or the Canadian dollar isn't as good as it was 10 years ago. There's all these, and you have the option to drink Okanagan and have some amazing Syrahs and Merlots and Cats and drink Canadian Zinfandel, right? That's grown in
Absolutely.
like, I mean, there's all these things we have an opportunity to do now. If you go to the East Coast and drink Tidal Bay and Lac de Blanc that's done in sparkling. You go to Quebec and you have some amazing hybrids and really interesting low yield Chardonnays and ciders. And then you come to Ontario and you've got 3 different wine regions, all within one province, all do a different story. I think we really, I appreciate pioneers like yourself that are out there saying, hey guys, you know, you need to look at this because we're doing amazing things. And we always say, we're Canadians, we're too humble. And we need outside recognition, but we're also getting that recognition internally. And we don't realize how much in demand our wines are outside of this country. Because I've had the opportunity to travel and taste wines at trade shows in London and in the States, and people taste our wine, love our wine, want more. We're just so small in the global scheme of wine production, and we need to focus on consumption here because it is sustainable. It is environmentally friendly. It reduces a whole bunch of other issues that we now face in the wine business as we move forward.
And isn't absolutely mind-boggling? We're one of the only country, producing wine country who import more of our consumption we import 60% of what we consume. So that's meaning we're consuming only 40% of our own wine. It's completely backward, right? If you go to, tell that to the French, I'd say, well, you know, and while we're here, and for me, it's when I put a Thomas Batchelder Chardonnay, a Closson Chase Chardonnay, beside a same price, a $45 Burgundian Chardonnay, that I realized that we are way, way further ahead than we think. We always think that we're trying to chase what they're doing out there. You know what? On the price point, we are so far ahead. If I find if I go to Merceau or if I go to Montmartre, it'll take me a week or 2 to find a Merceau at $45. Okay. And I can stop because I can find one. And what we put, like pound for pound, we are unbelievably competitive with some of the best Russian River Valley, some of the best Burgundian. And that's what people, I think, need to understand. No, I want to go on a national tour. I want to hit 7 different countries in Canada and doing that very exercise with people. And this is one of our goals before the end of the year. And you're bang on, Keith. I think that's where we're at now.
Right. And we look at those other regions, and the wine's amazing. I don't take away from anything that there's a lot of people making great wine in the world.
Oh, absolutely. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we're competitive.
You're absolutely right. And at your $45 price point, for example, using that from that area, the yields are going to be higher. There's probably not going to be a lot of new oak in it. There's a different level of wine for the same price. And when you come back home and you drink here, you're going to get some of that oak contribution from really good French oak, and you're going to get low yield from the viticulture. You're going to get passion, the care, and the concern of the winemaker who wants to tell the story, especially if you're talking about Thomas. Because, I mean, that's what Thomas does. He's very much like me. He wants to tell the story of where the grapes come from and give you an indication of a certain place at a certain time, and his interpretation of it. And I think that's the most important thing that we can do in Ontario, Prince Edward County, but in Canada in general, is put it out there and say, this is the story of my place, and I hope you enjoy it, right? And the value is in the bottle, because every winemaker doesn't wake up and go to harvest and say, today I'm going to make bad wine. We all want to make amazing wine, best of our abilities, with the tools that we have, with the grapes that come from the place where we grow them. And that is exactly what we we try to do.
Isn't that the definition of a vigneron? Eh? The true definition of a vigneron? That's amazing. Okay, you just led me to something. What Prince Edward County?
Yes.
What's special with Prince Edward County? Because in our show, we have like around like 25 to 3,000 people watching that show on a weekly basis. Lots of them are from Western Canada. Lots of them are on like lower mainland and Vancouver. Like a lot of people think that Prince Edward County is just outside of Niagara. Like, what makes Prince Edward County so special?
Well, we're the coolest growing region in all of Canada. We have the lowest amount of heat units, so that our opportunity to ripen fruit is exceptionally tight. We have a full continental climate with Mediterranean influences, so we have lots of heat in the summer. Like, it's not uncommon that we will see temperatures in the mid 30s with humidity in the low 40s. We have tremendously cold winters. And so we're challenged all the way around. It is literally growing on the mark. It's not uncommon to have frost. Although I have to be honest, thank God, knock on wood, we haven't had any in a while. 2015 was the last really bad one. So it's been a few years, but it's not uncommon.
We had a bad one on our side this year. We had a bad one at some place. We're looking at 60 to 70%.
Well, and then, yes, you had exactly what we had in 2015. You don't not just only have fruit loss with this production loss with this, but I've been told, because the soils that you grow in, some areas you actually had frozen ground, and built some roots in the plant. So you actually have to replant because the plant itself exploded interiorly in the cellular composition of it. So I mean, yeah, like, it's not just reducing yields; it's also the fact that those vines are actually dead. And that's what we face here every winter. Like, it's not uncommon for us. It's not uncommon. In the 20 years that I've been growing grapes in Prince Edward County, we've had 5 years where we didn't have minus 25. And at minus 25, everything above the ground is not fruitful. Those two primary buds, and even in some cases the tertiary bud, are destroyed. And so you end up, what we do here is we have to bury. So, if you think of the nice vineyard scene here in your Côte d'Or scene, because it is the golden slope that you have behind me. If you think about that, if you come to Prince Edward County in the winter, unless there's somebody using textiles, you will see literally hills of dirt at the bottom of every row, and under that dirt are next year's canes. So the canes that we have just put on the wire for this year were buried last September, October. Well, they were tied down and then buried in November once it starts to get cold, because we have to protect against winter. And this year wasn't looking like it was going to get cold. And then we had 2 days of minus 26, right? Like, literally just 2 days. That's it. And in those 2 days, everything that was above the ground is non-fruitful. And so that's the growing conditions here. Like, that's the biggest mitigating factor is winter. And now our biggest thing, because Prince Edward County is the second driest county of all in Ontario, is now we have issues with drought in the summer. And we have this beautiful calcareous clay limestone soils that are amazing water retention from all the snow melt or all the rain, because there's more rain now than there is snow, even though we had like stupid snowstorms this year. Which, if you're ever doing a interview, or you want to talk with some winemakers about how the climate's changing, sign me up, because I live it. And so it's all those things that allow us, that challenge us to. We have just enough time, frost-free days from bug break. We're calling probably in the next week, as you and I were talking beforehand. We're just pushing, and we're just starting to see some green tips coming out. I mean, on the younger plants, the newer plantings, we've got physical leaves, but we're just there. So we're a week behind Niagara, a week to 10 days. We'll catch up slightly, but we're still challenged in September and October, because our heat units are dropping usually in October. So it's not uncommon for us to have cold weather around Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving. And so therefore, we don't have that same window. And that's why we grow Chardonnay and we grow Pinot Noir, because to grow Cab Sauv, to grow Syrah, to grow some of those bigger reds, We would never get them right here. We'd make amazing rosés with lots, but we would never be able to make a still on that level. You know, there's some Merlot here that gets right, but the yields are exceptionally low. So you got to appreciate it because it is very old world style. Again, hate to mimic it to the other place, but it's very like much as Bordeaux was when I started drinking Bordeaux 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we do. Commercially, it's not commercially viable because it's only a ton an acre, because you need the photosynthetic property of all that plant to literally ripen those 10 clusters of fruit.
And no one is crazy enough to plant 10 acres of that because it's not financially viable. So we're looking at 50, 60 cases every couple of years of something. It's just a plant project.
That's why it's called the heart rate rate. We've got a lot of amazing examples of that from Prince Edward County. And you know, and we grow and make Pinot Gris, which I think is another varietal that grows exceptionally well here. You know, Mira does well here. Some of the hybrids do amazingly well here. So there are those things that tell you a story that don't taste the same grown from another region, because I also make Niagara Chardonnay, Niagara Pinot Gris, and made Niagara Pinot in the past, all grown the same way that I grow the grapes here, but they taste different because they come from a different place. And I think this place for us is what we want to accentuate. And you know, one of the things we always hear is Prince Edward County. You always hear Ontario wine's expensive. It's really not when you think for the same $20 that you spend on, for example, a California wine.
The quality is not even close. And it's not even close in terms of quality.
But only about 25% of that is actual revenue to the winery. So the wineries sell to Ontario for a lot less, and all that money goes back to the winery, and the other portion of it goes to the LCBO, which is great because that means it goes into the coffers of government. But if you buy a bottle of wine from our shop at our retail space, 80% of that value goes back into the community, pays for the staff, it pays for hydro, it pays for the services. It just reduplicates. It's just constantly renewing itself because everything comes back and stays local, and it supports everybody. And it makes us, you know, the catchword nowadays is sustainable. And I've listened to a lot of people talk about it, and that's definitely what we all have to be. We strive to be that anyways. You know, regenerative farming, which I never heard that term. And I was listening to podcasts and California winemakers and viticulturists who were talking about what they're doing out there. And I'm like, oh,
that's what we do.
Well, I do that. And I'm like, holy, regenerative agriculture. And I never knew I did it. Right? Because just to me, it's respect for the land. It's respect for the place. And so that's what we do here. We have care and concern. We live off the land. Why would we jeopardize what tells us the story in the wines that we make? And Prince Edward County has that in spades, right? We're surrounded by Lake Ontario, which gives us the moderating influence. So we have, you know, we are literally that island. I always tell people, if you watch the evening radar and do the national weather and actually Toronto in Ontario, just on the east side of that, the lakeshore doesn't continue like all the other Great Lakes do, right? There's a defined ridge to all the Great Lakes. There's none of these masses of land sticking off to the side. Prince Edward County is that giant landmass that sticks out on the north side of Lake Ontario, between Cobourg and Kingston, right? We take up a huge area within Lake Ontario, and we push all other 4 Great Lakes waters go right off our south shore, right? So we have a huge amount of volume of water constantly flowing past us, which gives us a different climate, allows us to grow grapes and ripen them. And we as Closson Chase are located what we call in the Golden Triangle, because we're 5 miles in west, 5 miles up north, and we're on a high aspect. So between those 3 things, we've got an extra site. It gives us an extra opportunity to get a little more heat units that allows us to ripen just a little bit more. And that's the key thing throughout Prince Edward County is we can ripen it. We can get sugar in it, and we can get a lot of flavor on a low alcohol frame and provide a lot of nice density and richness from what the Mother Nature gives above the soil to what the vines feed, and to what my interpretation of that is. And so it's it's a really unique place. And if you have an opportunity to come visit, I mean, there's 43 wineries right now. We're not the 150 plus that are in Niagara. We're not the Okanagan with 150 plus, but it's a unique environment. We are, to quote Tony Asper, we're the Sonoma of Ontario, because we have farms, cows, riverside vineyards, orchards, and produce growers, and all those things are here. And that's what we pride ourselves on. So it's a total community.
Is that because you mentioned that your site is a little higher in elevation?
Yeah.
Is it allow you to, with the wheel? Is it allow you to stay a little bit more away from the mildew and the humidity and the problem that can bring? Because that's something we don't have here in the Okanagan, because it's so dry. We don't have to worry. We have to worry about the forest fire, but we don't have
Right.
to worry about the humidity and the fungus. So is the little higher up altitude help on that aspect?
It's probably a blessing and a curse, right? Because and when we talk elevation, right, we're 100 feet. Kirkside Vineyard, which is the highest elevation on the property, is 151 meters above sea level. So that's
Okay.
500 feet, right? So we're kind of, if you compare it to other wine regions, we're halfway up the slope of Burgundy, right? We're in that Premier Cru, maybe even some Grand Cru kind of heights, but I think most of them are 300 meters. So they're
Yeah.
a little bit higher than we are. You know, you go to Oregon, where I was last year for IPNC, and it's similar here. They have mountains. We don't have mountains. We're a big limestone outcrops. We're just one big rolling limestone plateau. But that elevation, that more exposure, which is huge. So we get a little more heat units, gives us a different weather pattern through the summer. So we get storms that separate and go around us because of that elevation, because the ground heats up, and that the geothermal capacity of the ground and its ability to radiate that heat back to the environment changes our composition. There's always, generally speaking, a wind here. So because of that influence of the water being cooler and then hitting the warmer ground when the sun is out, because ground heat creates that natural convection. So we always have that laze that comes in off the water, which helps. The issue with mildews here is that breeze usually won't start until about mid-morning. So
Okay.
the whole morning up until maybe, I'm surmising here, because it's probably about 70% of the time we don't get that breeze, but the other 30% of the time it can be blowing gale force winds. But that delay of wind coming into the vineyard now allows those funguses to sporulate, because there is no air movement, and you have all this beautiful sun, and then you have canopy density, and you have interior leaves, because we are young soils, right? I mean, we haven't been growing grapes here for 600, 700, 800 years like they have been in other places in the world. We've been growing grapes for 30. So, I mean, it changes with very healthy soils that we need to make it healthier, because they haven't been farmed excessively as much as other places in the world before grapes were planted as well. And so it provides us with some challenges. And so we do okay. But that elevation, being elevated here, really helps us, right? And you know, have this with other winemakers further on down, closer to the water. And we're generally picking Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is usually the first varietal we pick. We pick our Pinot Gris, but there's a small amount of that being made. So most of our production is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So we'll pick Pinot Noir while the guys on the lake pick Chardonnay. And then we pick Chardonnay while they're picking Pinot, because our Chardonnay can hang longer, but our Pinot can't, because we're warmer. So Pinot breaks down faster. So we need to pick our Pinot before their Pinot. And then we're able to let our Chardonnay hang a little bit longer to get a little more ripeness, a little more richness, and a little more physiological ripeness. And then they pick their Pinot. So it is literally,
Yeah.
as
It's interchange the cycle.
and it's all place variant. And it's like you said, as Niagara figured out their climate and their soil and their aspects, create the 10 subregions. And just like they've done in the Okanagan with the Similkamee and the gold, I think it's gold. It's a Gold Mile bench.
The Golden Mile bench versus the Nevada bench. There's a tremendous difference, right?
Versus Okanagan Falls versus the Okanagan Valley versus Similkameen versus Vancouver Island versus Oliver versus Osoyoos. So I mean, very much just like you have those variation, height and altitude, temperature, and places like that. Same thing happens here as well, and we're able to see that. I make wine. I make Pinot Noir from the next concession south. It's halfway between us and the lake, and the fruit composition and the flavor profile is totally different. It is literally 2 miles further, but it's that much cooler down there, and everything's delayed, and therefore everything changes. And I think that's really interesting as a young wine region, as a young winemaker who's only been doing this for 20 years, to be able to start to see all those things. And I think that's interesting. So even now, as people start to come to Prince Edward County, Chardonnay, for example, from Wellington, right? Or what I'm calling the Wellington bench, or the lakeshore area of Wellington, and the Greer Road area, those wines taste different. There's similarities. There's the acidity.
Oh yeah, but
all those things that are the soil are give you a story. So Prince Edward County Chardonnay is Prince Edward County Chardonnay. You put it against BC, Niagara, and Prince Edward County. 3 Chardonnays, they're all going to taste different, and you're going to be able to say, based upon their acidic structure, where they're all from. And I think that's where we're moving, and that's the understanding that we have. And so that's what
here we are. Hey, we have 8 amazing wines available this week with what we do. And I want to start with something is from outside of Prince Edward County, because I was really surprised of the flavor profile, the structure composition. It's the Cajun Watson Pinot Gris. I'm familiar with Niagara River. That's very, very tiny, small appellation, but there's so much complexity and typicity in Niagara River. So tell me a little bit, because you guys have a really good connection with the Cajun Watson vineyard. There's some of your fruits from the 20-mile bench, from the 4-mile creek, actually. 4-mile creek, 20-mile bench is on the escarpment. But still, Cajun Watson here vineyard with Pinot Gris. I give it a 92 points. I think it's an exceptional Pinot Gris. I'm in love with the crunchy finish. I'm in love with that. Sometimes to me, Pinot Gris can be a little bit boring on the finish. And yes, that citrus peel on the finish brings everything back at the end. And I absolutely love that. So tell me a little bit more about that wine.
Okay. So a little story on it. I've been at Closson. I've been growing grapes and making wine, or assisting with making wine and assisting with growing grapes for 20 years now, since my wife and I moved here in 2003. And Pinot Gris was something that I enjoyed, and I enjoyed from Alsace, which I thought was its homeland. And then I got introduced to Trentino Alto Adige. And I was, as a somm in Toronto, I was buying Santa Margarita when it was $10 a bottle and was good quality, because the yields were less than 4 tons an acre. And then they realized they can make a lot more of it. People will still buy it, and people will pay more money for it, and so they started growing more. And so I kind of fell out of fashion with Pinot Gris for a while, because I was just like, well, we're seeing the call Grigio and anything. Anyway, diatribe. So in 2015, when I took over making wine, I thought we need something that's stainless steel. And we have these tanks that are sitting empty through harvest, because we're barreling all our Chardonnays. And the same with Pinot. Pinot was going to barrel. We had all these tanks that were sitting empty, and I thought, well, let's make something that's unoaked. And what are we going to make, right? And I had the opportunity to work with Pinot Gris in a hiatus I took for 2 years, as well as one of my fellow friends who's a winemaker down at Hubs Creek, Batista, was making Pinot Gris. And one of the first Pinot Gris I had tasted, he's 2 miles south of me. I was like, wow, this is really impressive. And I think there's a story to be told here with Pinot Gris. So we planted Pinot Gris vineyard in 2016. Bad year to plant, because it was a super dry year. The drought of 66 years, no moisture for almost 4 months. And so the vineyard struggled. We were able to save a good amount of the vines through watering, but it was challenging to get water that deep into those young vines root system. So we managed to do okay. So we started making Pinot Gris from the estate in 2020, because it takes about 5 years here to get fruit from young vines. So I thought, well, let's start making Pinot Gris anyways, because I need to make it. I need to learn how to
Yeah, you need to get your feet wet, right? You need to get your feet wet at some point.
what is my expression of Pinot Gris? And so we started working with Kevin. Now, Kevin Watson, quick diatribe, or some history. Kevin was selling those used barrels back in 2006. And so 2006, when I was working with Deborah, we knew that 2007, we were going to run out of Niagara Chardonnay and Niagara Pinot Noir. And our vineyard here was just young. So we needed some volume to make this
Financially viable. Financially viable. At some point, there's a business relationship here.
You gotta have some money to pay the people that are doing the work.
Absolutely.
So, I was down there picking up some barrels, and I jokingly said to Kevin, "I'm going to be in need for some Pinot Noir. You got any?" And he said, "I've got 1.2 acres. I'm willing to give you an acre of it. I need the other 0.2 for my home winemaking people. But it's yours. And you're going to make the first wine off of it, because for the last 7 years, I haven't been taking a commercial crop off of it." So we started making wine with KJ Watson Pinot Noir in 07. Then we started buying Chardonnay from Kevin in 2008. The way that arrangement works is we rent acreage. We don't buy grapes, we rent acreage. So that the grapes are grown the way we want them grown.
So you're leasing the land.
You got it. And he takes care of it. And he's a fastidious grower, really good fruit. I've always enjoyed making wine from the property. And then in 2015, when we decided that we were going to plant in 2016, we started making, I reached out and said, "Hey, you got some Gris?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "We're not going to do the same agreement because I've got Gris all over the place and I can't give you a defined parcel. But what I'll do is I'll give you a defined parcel within my blocks." So that's why we call it KJ Watson Pinot Gris. It comes from the 4 Mile Creek. This is just on the 4 Mile Creek Road. So the boundary line there, sandy loam soils, which for me, when I tasted the fruit, and he was directing me that towards some other people that were making Pinot Gris from his fruit, it gave me a good indication what they were doing with it. And then as I started to ferment with it and play with it, I realized that there's a lot of bright citrus and florals and earth tones, amazing nuances in this wine that I think I can show, that I can tell the story with. And so that's how we started. So Cool fermented it. First one was very, for lack of a better word, commercially made. I used a yeast because I purchased just juice. And then as I've evolved and grown, the wine has changed. So there's actually 2 wines that go into making that wine. So I ferment batch 2 different yeasts, 2 different temperatures, different protocols and the aging and their ability. And then those 2 wines come back together to make this. So each wine has different characteristics that tell a different part of the story. But ultimately for me, it's keeping that freshness, that acidity, that citrus, grapefruit peel, and keeping some bitterness in there, as well as keeping those refreshing acids, as well as the fruit that's worked so hard in the vineyard to grow. And so I don't want to mask any of those things. And every wine that I make, because I came out of the restaurant business for my first career, I was a somm when I left.
That's why we're sharing a good, we have a good connection here. That's exactly how I started my career, the restaurant hotel back east. So we're talking the same language here.
And I fell in love with food and wine.
And Greek can be so versatile at the table. All that I love, especially you mentioned Alsace earlier. It was one of my favorite wines, especially from Trembach. Like Chipotle Gris from Trembach, Catherine Trembach, and like it can go with so many different dishes.
Absolutely, right. And so it became kind of like, for lack of better, it became my patio wine, because I make wine for me, right? I love that everybody loves the wines that I make. Everybody's willing to their hard-earned money on it, and I appreciate that. And I want them to put it on the table and be proud and say, "You know what, this is good wine, and I like you guys, and I enjoy making this food, and I think this food and this wine work exceptionally well together. And now let's sit down, let's eat and drink and laugh and look back at the day and look towards the future while we enjoy what's in this bottle with with everybody. And I always relate it to my 100-year-old grandmother who looks at me and says, we all have to eat, right? So why not eat and drink people that you enjoy spending time with, eat and drink as best as you possibly can. And so that's why this wine is. And I drink this wine. I enjoy this wine. I think if it's a Friday afternoon and I don't know what I want, I'll pop this or I'll pop the rosé, some of that, and then that actually ultimately leads me to what I'm going to decide to have for dinner. And I may just keep drinking this wine with dinner as well. For me, it's all about having a low alcohol structure so that you can have a glass or two. But when you have food, you have something that has all the balance, the richness, the acid to be there and to complement all the hard work that you did in the kitchen. And I think that's the synergy with food and wine for me. And so I think that's what the wine is. So it doesn't go through malolactic for those wine geeks that are listening, because sometimes they ask, this has got all that still in there. So that's where some of that greatness comes from. Because of that, I have to treat it like a different wine. I have to do some things that I don't do to my Chardonnays or my Pinots. And that's just so it doesn't go through secondary fermentation and bottling. And always available first thing in the year. And I enjoy making it. It's always fun. It's always one of the wines that at the end of the fermentation, I'm really interested to try and see where it's come out in terms of, because it's one of the first wines that are actually finished wines, for lack of a better word, because it's grown for that one. It's grown in 22 and you're tasting it 6 months later in 23.
Yeah.
So it gives you a complete immediate, this is what the 22 vintage was like.
Exactly. And when I started and when I tasted the rosé, like when I had like the rosé 2022 as well, side by side, and you're like, okay, now you can define a little bit of there's a definition of vintage, right there. The is a fresh vintage. You can see a purity, a definition of flavor. It's really, really defined. There's a precision in there.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and that's, I try to accentuate that because I think that's important. And the rosé is a unique rosé for me for this past vintage. Don't do that make that wine all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm trying for. I'm trying to tell you a story about what that year was like and what my interpretation of that year was like. So hopefully, thank you. I'm glad it.
Oh yeah. Let's talk about something again, because wow, time flies by. We're already 40 minutes in. I know. We need to take that offline at some point because we can talk for a full day. There's one thing that I want to talk about.
Sure.
Something that I was really excited to get into the Grand Cuvée because I know these are very special wines. But before that, the South Clos, to me, as good as the Grand Cuvée can be, as great of the experience, it's a luxurious experience in the mouth. But the South Clos, it's something special. And when I say special, to me, I give it a 95 plus points.
Wow.
It's last year, I've tasted over 1,200 Canadian wine last year.
Yeah.
And I give it, it's a lot. It's a lot of, if you break it down per week, it's a lot of wine. I got wine from all over the country. But anyway, I gave 94 points or better to less than 100 wines last year. And like a handful of 95. This wine make it 95 plus, and was absolutely blown away by the South Clos. Chardonnay and Pinot both are, and I do a top 10 wine every year, and I can tell you, we're not even at mid-year here, and I can tell you that the Pinot Noir at South Clos will be part of my top 10 wine.
Thank you.
It is incredible. So tell me what's special with that parcel of land, because I've no doubt you're an outstanding winemaker, but you're telling the story of a piece of land. So that South Clos must be something really, really special.
Well, it's yeah. As a wine geek and a winemaker, in my opinion, you always want to try and you always want to have have something special, right? And so the South Cole was the first planting that we had, and we planted that from 1999 to 2005. And it's in a valley, and the soils are really shallow. There's a lot of exposed rubble. Um, it's a challenge because it's a humid pocket. Um, but the vines are old. There's this unique, um, it's the rock. Let's just put it that way. There's no soil in this vineyard, very little of it, really just enough soil to keep all the rocks in place. And it sits in a low spot. And what happens is it becomes a heat sink in the day. So it takes a little bit longer for this vineyard to heat up. So when it heats up after the sun crests in the east and it warms up, you get this slow heating process during the day to where the vineyard holds the heat. And then when the cold air comes in, because usually, much like everywhere else, as the sun starts to crest and fall descend and go down for sunset, it starts to get cooler. And so with that cold air falls into the South Clove, because the South Clove retains so much heat during the day, the ground actually radiates the heat and pushes all that cold air up. So we get an extra of extended ripeness in the evenings that the church side doesn't get, because the church side isn't in a bowl. It sits on the top of the hill. And when that cold air comes rushing in out of the west and north, that vineyard
Cool off the whole side.
right? And then all that cold air slowly rolls down the hill. And as it's rolling down the hill, it's picking up the heat from the valley because it's been trapped in that heat sink, and it starts to rise up again, as well as the ground radiates it. So you get this little convection that occurs, and therefore you get more heat after the sunset. So as we're moving into 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, that vineyard temperature is coming down, but we're getting more maturity in that vineyard because of the extra heat. That's
the phenolic ripeness, right?
Yeah. And walking through it, that's usually the last block we pick too, because it's the last block out. So right now, if you walk through the vineyard, the young Chardonnay that we planted in the Ridge Vineyard, where our estate Pinot Gris comes from, it's got leaves. The Church Side Chardonnay, it's got just about leaves. The South Clove is just starting in the Chardonnay, but the Pinot that's the last one to bud on the estate is the South Clove. And it's always, generally speaking, it's the last Pinot we pick. And it doesn't take that extra week, but needs that extra week to get to the same level as everywhere else. And it truly is unique, because when I made Church Side and I tasted the wines, there's a difference. There's a difference in tannic structure. There's a difference in fruit composition. There's a difference in earth tone and its ability to display that. And
the level of minerality, like on the Chardonnay, I feel like the whetstone, that limestone, like I feel it much more on the South Clove that you feel it on the Church Side. Church Side, it's bright. Church Side is expressive, but the South Clove is deep, and you got layers of minerality, and you used, and I'm sure, when I taste it, I get that natural fermentation. I believe that you go wild ferment with these wines as well.
I start everything naturally, so all the sherds get pressed. They get very minimal amounts of sulfur off the press. I don't use it to do anything except try and slow the natural yeast from starting, so we can cold settle. So my Chardonnay doesn't go to barrel clean. It usually is slightly cloudy because it does have some protein still left in it. And then it gets natural fermentation for probably 3 to 4 degrees alcohol, which generally takes, once they warm up, takes 3 to 5 days. So the wine goes in cold because it's been cold settled before it goes to the barrel. And then it naturally starts to ferment on its own. And so through the process, it generates some of those things. The issue's been is that there's some native yeasts and native bacteria here in the county that are quite strong. And if you have a lot of residual sugar, which we generally tend to have decent sugar levels at harvest, you can get some off things in there. And so I try and avoid those. So once we build up that culture and we're getting up close to 3 or 4 degrees of alcohol, then I'll introduce a cultured yeast just to get it to dryness.
To eat up that part, you know, ahead stuff.
Exactly. Let's be clear. Not every barrel of wine I make is clean. There are issues throughout the barrels, but the level of differentiation is tolerable to me. I'm okay with a little bit of all those things that we don't want our wines to be. I'm okay with Brett. I'm okay with VA. I'm okay with
It's part of it. It's part of it.
you know, everything in tech, everything in moderation is good. When it gets too far, then it to me, it's not the story of the place. It's something else that's gone on, whether it was intentional or unintentional. So all those things add to it. And I think for me, that's the key thing is it's about showing the wine where to go, or where you'd like it to go, and then giving it every opportunity to get there. So every year it's like raising a child. You do your best to get them to where they're going to be before they venture off into the world.
But at some point they're on their own. At some point they're making their own decision.
That's exactly it. And then the wine is the same way, right? Like once it leaves my winery, I can't dictate how you're going to cellar it. I don't dictate when you're going to drink it. I don't dictate what you're going to drink it with or who, right? So all those things are out of my control. But what I can do, and a lot of things in the winery are out of my control too, because I choose not to be
on the way.
Right? I guess that's the best way to put it. Like, I don't have an issue letting things go the way they're going to go. Now, having said that, I don't want it to be full of crap. Is it going to happen? Probably. And if it does, then I'll deal with it when I deal with it, and we'll figure it out how it goes. A little bit of that in the blend can lift a lot of things, right? Like
absolutely,
Brett and a Pinot all of a sudden brings in this whole earthy tone that was never there before, and it amps these things. And VAs can lift all your florals and all those aromatics. If it's too much, then it literally just tastes like vinegar. But if there's a little bit in there, it helps lift everything else, provides a nice acid backbone in there. And even though it is acetic acid and it's not necessarily what we really like all the time, it can do things, and it works exceptionally well with food. Not that I intend to have a huge amount of acetic acid in my wine. I don't want to, but it happens. And as long as it's a component and not the wine, then I think
and not a dominant, a component, not a dominant.
Exactly. And so
yeah, I'm with you.
And the South Clos, we made the South Clos was the first Pinot I ever made with Deborah. So we made it in 2007, and I kind of went, Pinot Noir is what we should be doing. I mean, it was very easy for me 16 years ago, early on in my winemaking, to say, yeah, we make great Chardonnays in Prince Edward County, but I think this site is Pinot Noir country. And I think we can do amazing things with Pinot Noir on these slopes that will tell a story that is just as unique as any of the other great Pinot Noir regions in the world. And that's what I've been focusing on, trying to make great Pinot and trying to keep making better Chardonnay that tells a more definitive story about here. And whether it's the South Clos, the Church side, and eventually the Rick, I'll be making Chardonnays from all three sites, just like I make Pinot from 4 different sites, so that you understand why we're here and what we do and how these places tell you in the glass where they're from, and less about me, because there's definitely some continuity because I am part of terroir.
Yeah, you sure are. You sure are. Absolutely.
The barrels that I select, the yeast that I use, how long I let things macerate, when I choose not to do things, which is usually when things go wrong. Because I go, hey,
the way you choose, the way you choose to farm, have an immediate impact on the soil, which is a big part of the terroir. Right? There's some there's some vineyard in the country that, like, we all know the names, right? Like this, Wismar Foxcroft, okay. Grimsby Hillside, all the way to Okanagan, you have the Checkmate Vineyard, you have the Lazy Dog Vineyard. These are famous, the fruit. You know what, to me, since 3 weeks ago, when I tasted for the second time a different vintage of South Clos is part of these names now. And I swear, oh, absolutely, there is something special, Keith, in there. It's incredible. That terroir speaks directly to me. It speaks directly to my emotion to my wine loving, I burst into excitement now when I hear Solid Glow as much as the Wismar Foxcroft or Grimsby Hillside.
Right?
Is it amazing? Is it amazing? And so that leads me to talk a little bit because I don't want to leave you without talking about the Grand Cuvée. Let's say we're living in a world where having a bottle of wine nearing $100 or seeing it more and more across the country. And some producers now are pushing the 150 because that's the world we live in. That's right, because I want to know a little bit more about the process of making a Grand Cuvée. Obviously, it's the cuvée of your best barrel of what you get from these very vintage. So tell me a little bit more how you put everything together, because there's a richness in there. There's a luxury in there. You taste luxurious. I feel there's a different barrel usage there. I feel there's a different attention to detail. So tell me a little bit more about the Grand Cuvée before I let you go.
So the Grand Cuvée was born because 3 reasons. Deborah made a wine iconoclast, and we started that back in 2005. We were tasting barrels, and there was just these 2 barrels that were just like complete wines onto themselves. And we jokingly said, well, what if we blend them? And then we did that. Like, you take 250 milliliters and 250 milliliters and make that, and you sit there, or we made 2 bottles, right? So she took a bottle and I took a bottle, and we were both just like this. These wines are harmonious. They were amazing separate, but together they were just next level because one helped the other. So we made that in 5, 7, and 10 with great vintages here in Ontario. And then I took over winemaking from Deborah at 15. And I was always asked going forward, will there ever be another iconoclast? And then you get asked as a winemaker, well, which one's your favorite? And that's like saying that I like my son or like my daughter or whatever the case may be. I like them both equally and I love them both greatly. And at different times, they're like one more than the other. But I don't
Yes, yeah, exactly.
like one ever less than the other. And then 2017 came along and we had a good amount of fruit and it was an amazing vintage. And I was tasting 3 barrels and I was like, oh, there's some barrels in here that I think if I was to blend these barrels together, the wine that I would create from them would be, in my opinion, next level, right? And they would be my wines because I'm not making them based upon, am I looking at a single clos? So am I making a church side or am I making a silk clos? I simply went through and through my tasting notes went, okay, if I put these 5 barrels together, they should make an exceptional wine. And they weren't the best barrels, right? They were just barrels.
Complementary to each other.
Well, that's exactly what it is, right? So it's not like I think, for example, I think you're drinking the 2019. And it was like, okay, I'm going to use this. I'm going to take this one new wood from the church side. I'm going to take this one new wood from the south clos. And then I'm going to take this 5-year-old barrel from the church side. And I'm going to take this 3-year-old barrel from the south clos. And then I'm going to put a barrel of pressed juice in there. And it's going to be this barrel, right? And all the cooperages were different and all the wines were different. But the idea was, let me make my wine and let me put some oak in it because there's 40% new wood in that wine. And I like the palate structure on it. I like its acid structure. I like its definition of fruit. I like its earth tones. I like its finish, its longevity. And just from drinking Pinot and loving Pinot, and we're talking about Pinot, but I do it with Chardonnay as well. The idea was, let's make next level, right? Let's make something that will age and will be graceful as it ages and tell you a more defined story so that when people ask us for wines to compare to other wine regions in the world, let's try and make it a little more fair, right? Because if you're a top house from a Grand Cru Burgundy, you're putting 100% new wood in it because you can.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can.
$400 a bottle, right? Well, we don't have that option in Ontario because we're not at that acclamation yet, acclaim to get what we need to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of me going through like that. And then I made it in 17. I did it in 18, and rightfully so, maybe I shouldn't have. I thought it was there. And I did it in 19. And in 19, I reversed. So the 17 is 60% church side and 40% South Clove. And 2019, it's 60% South Clove and 40% church. And then after I made it, I got thinking, well, what if I would have not used that barrel in the Grand Cuvée and I would have put it in my South Clove blend instead? What would that have done to the South Clove blend? So then I re-examined and I went, you know what? I'm not going to go there now. I'm going to focus on defining each individual place. And now as we grow and expand, maybe I'll have the opportunity to make another Grand Cuvée or something by the other name or whatever we're going to call it. That will be a even more tighter blend from all the estate. And it won't necessarily be this place, that place. Maybe half of this barrel, half of that barrel, half of this, half of that, a third of this, whatever the portions are, to make 100 cases of exceptional Pinot Noir that really do have all those
component
nuances and all the things that I want, because I like drinking Pinot that's 7 to 10 years old, and I want my wines to develop in there. And so that in 7 to 10 years, because I think the great thing about some of the great wines that we drink is we look for those tertiary wine geeks. We look for those tertiary aromas. We look for all that ageability, but we also want fruit. And the issue with Pinot is
brightness and freshness.
If you don't have the right combination, when you get to that 7 to 10 year mark, one of those things can be proportion. And I never want that. I want to be able to wine at 7 to 10 years and still have some of that fruit, right? It should be fading, but should also have some of that brightness still. So you can look and that first couple of glasses, you're like, yes, this is strawberries and cherries and cranberries and raspberries, which are generally the typical 4 fruits that we have here. And then it has all those earth tones, and then the acid's still there. And the barrel contribution is decided, but it still frames all that beautiful fruit. And I heard an amazing explanation for oak. Oak is a picture frame, right? Just gives you limits on what the picture inside is going to be so that you can focus more in on the picture and understand the picture, while the frame just becomes a detail that becomes oblivious because you're so focused on what you see and what you're feeling and what you're tasting to actually worry about what was on the outside. I thought that was a good analogy to use.
And when you start noticing the frame, that's mean you have the wrong frame because you notice it.
Yes.
You know?
And all the hard work that you've done to make
with the painting, it ruins it.
It gets out of the way, right?
I'm with you.
If the frame's really nice, you go, oh, it's a nice painting, but the frame's really beautiful. And the frame you buy, unless you make it yourself. But most people don't make frames, right? But we grow the grapes and we make the wine. And so to go and buy amazing wood and then that wood over all that amazing fruit, I'm just telling you the story of the cooperage. And so that was what it became to me. What's the balance, right? Is 40% new wood good? And I like it. I mean, I like it. So I don't mind that combination of oak in there and to balance it out. So will it come back? Yeah. I mean, 2021, I made a lot of Pinot in 2021 because it was an exceptional vintage here in Ontario, volume wise. And our quality is really good too, because we thinned the vineyards. So any of the dilution that we got from the rain at harvest was minimal. So there's still lots of weight and texture and character. They're not as big and rich as the 20s because they're not 2020. But they still tell an amazing story. And because I made so much wine and I was looking for things to ferment in, I fermented Pinot in stainless steel for the first time. And I really enjoyed it. And it's part of my vineyard blend. And now that inclination to do more Pinot in different vessels for fermentation for their blending capacity, or the story that they tell that's different than when you do it in a 6-ton wooden fermenter, or when you do it, in a small micro cuvee 600 liter barrel. They all tell different stories. And so ideally now we can even have bigger palette of paint to use to paint a different picture to give you even more in-depth into that. So it'll be back at some point. What it'll be called, I'm not 100% sure. And there's some other things I'm looking at doing. I mean, we're not done just yet. I'm pretty sure there's more Pinot going in the ground somewhere around here. And I've got some ideas on what I'd like to do about that.
It's incredible how you grow as a winemaker, right? Even up to 20 years, you're going to vintage like 21. You have kind of too much juice, and now you grow as a winemaker in terms of new ideas, in terms of new visions, in terms of like, you know what? I've been doing that way for too long. Let's try to evolve a little bit. It's like, it's amazing, Keith. I can keep going on that conversation for at least another 3.5 hours, at least. But
Wow.
you know
We
what?
love what we do, right?
We love what we do, and I would love to. And I think for the first time, we've been doing Carl's Wine Club for almost 3 years now, and I don't think that I had as much 92 plus, 92 points and more. All of the wine in the pack, I believe, are 92 plus points
Wow.
and above. It's never happened before. Never. And we've featured some amazing wineries. Like I said, we've done stuff with Thomas. We've done stuff with Leaning Post. We've featured Black Hills. You know, this week, to me, it's all about passion, authenticity as well. And it's so important for me to feature an authentic story with people like you who just showcase the best of their terroir. And it's amazing. I'm in love with your wines. And I really want that our members, 10,000 across the country,
That's crazy,
will all take advantage of the incredible story that you tell with these 8 wines that we have this week. Keith, thank you so very much for your time. And let's be in touch very soon, okay? Thank you very much.
Yeah, and enjoy your trip.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, keep up the great work, my friend. It's amazing.
I'll do my best.
Take care.
Holy smokes. I hope you had as much fun as I did listening to that. And I hope you had a wonderful Wine Wednesday, a wonderful Wine Wednesday. Cheers, guys. Thanks so much for stopping by. And we will see you next Wine Wednesday. Have a great night.